4 million years ago, in a warm coastal shallows, two shadows shared the same water. One was a giant, longer than a school bus. It had ruled this ocean for millions of years, and nothing had ever crowded it. The other was smaller, faster, gray-backed and lean, a third the length of the giant, moving through the same nursery water where the giant's young were born. It did not look like a threat to anything that size. Both carried the same weapon, wide, triangular, saw-edged teeth. For 150 years, that shared weapon told a simple story, that the small shark was the giant, shrunk down, a descendant, the heir to the throne of the seas. That story has it exactly backwards. They are not parent and child, and the small shark is about to take everything. This codex opens on a question that took 150 years to ask correctly. Not which shark was bigger, that is the easy question. The hard one is quieter. Where did the smaller one come from? The answer is not what the teeth suggest. The great white did not come from the Megalodon. They are not parent and child. They are not even the same family. And the resemblance that fooled everyone was a trap. Today, we trace two separate bloodlines. We find the exact fossil that proves where the great white really came from. And we reach the moment the two finally shared an ocean, because only one of them walked away with the sea. It was not the one anyone would guess. Before we go anywhere prehistoric, anchor it in today. The great white you would see from a cage dive boat off Guadalupe Island, or the Farallones, or the coast of South Africa. That animal is the survivor of this story. It is still here, roughly 6 meters, about 20 feet, and close to 2 tons. Its rival is not. The rival was Otodus megalodon. Reconstructions put the largest individuals somewhere near 15 to 18 meters, 50 to 60 feet, about 3 times the length of a big modern great white, and many times its weight. Its teeth could pass 18 centimeters, the size of a human hand. It was the largest predatory shark that ever lived, and for around 20 million years, it was the apex of the sea. Nothing hunted it, nothing came close. The internet loves to stage this as a cage match. Megalodon versus great white. Who wins? That framing is everywhere, and it quietly poisons the real story, because it assumes the two are the same kind of animal, just scaled differently. A big one and a small one, cut from the same cloth. They never were cut from the same cloth. That single assumption is the exact mistake we are here to take apart. And it goes all the way back to the man who first gave the giant its name. The real drama sits in the late Miocene and the early Pliocene, the last few million years before the giant vanished. Two shark families were sharing the same coastlines. One was ancient, up to 18 meters, and had been the apex predator for ages. The other was new, mid-sized, and spreading fast across the world's oceans. They overlapped in the shallows for a narrow window of time, and then one of them was gone. The rocks that hold the clearest evidence for what happened between them are not underwater at all. They sit today in a desert on the coast of Peru, a formation called Pisco, a stretch of dry, wind-cut rock that was once a rich, cold water sea. Remember that name. It gives up the great white's real ancestor later in this story, and it keeps the giant's body too. The question then is sharper than who would win. If the great white is not a shrunken megalodon, if it came up from somewhere else entirely, what was it doing in the giant's nursery? And why is it the one still swimming off California tonight, while the largest shark that ever lived is a set of teeth in a drawer? But there is a problem, and it starts with the man who named the monster. In 1843, the Swiss naturalist Louis Agassiz published his landmark studies on fossil fishes, one of the founding works of the whole field. Among the teeth he described was a giant. He gave it a name that would outlive him by more than a century: Carcharodon megalodon. That first word matters more than the second. Carcharodon is the great white's own genus, its family surname. Agassiz looked at the giant fossil tooth, looked at a great white tooth, and saw the same broad triangle and the same saw edge running down both sides. He filed the monster directly into the great white's group. He was not being careless. In 1843, with only teeth to work from, the resemblance really did look like proof of kinship. And that single filing decision seeded 150 years of one idea: that Megalodon was a giant great white, and the shark alive today is its shrunken heir. It went on to documentaries. It went into movies. It became the first thing most people believe about either animal, that a shrunken Megalodon would be a great white, and a grown great white would be a Megalodon. Most tellings stop right there. The teeth looked similar. People got confused. End of story. That skips the actual trap. Similar teeth are exactly what two big predators eating the same slippery, mid-sized prey would evolve, whether or not they are related at all. A steak knife and a circular saw both have serrations, because serrations are simply what cuts flesh. It does not make the two tools relatives. Biologists call that convergence, two separate lineages arriving at the same solution on their own. Convergence is not a footnote here. It is the whole reason a founding father of paleontology put the wrong shark in the wrong family, and nobody corrected it for a century and a half. That raises the obvious question. If the teeth are a false clue, if Megalodon was never a Carcharodon at all, then where does each shark actually come from? The rocks answer that. They just needed better dates and a strange half-serrated tooth from Peru to do it. And what they say does not agree with Agassiz. And then it gets stranger, because up close, the two teeth were never quite identical. A Megalodon tooth is a bone crusher. It is thick and robust, its serrations fine and even, and it carries a dark, V-shaped band of enamel near the root. Specialists call that band a bourlette. The great white's tooth is a blade by comparison. It is thinner, its serrations coarser, and it has no bourlette at all. That band is simply missing. For decades, those differences were waved off as minor variation. They were not minor. They were the first hint of two separate blueprints. And the fossil that proved it was waiting in that same Peruvian desert the whole time. In 2012, a team led by Dana Ehret described a shark from the Pisco Formation. They named it Carcharodon hubbelli. It lived in the late Miocene, about 6.5 million years ago. This one fossil is the missing link, made literal. Its teeth are caught mid-change. The serrations are coarser than a smooth-toothed shark's. They are finer and less complete than a modern great white's. It is a transition frozen in enamel. We can watch the great white's saw edge being built, tooth by tooth, out of an ancestor that had almost none. The date is not a guess either. Ehret's team remeasured the Pisco rock layers using crystals and chemical signatures locked into the sediment, and pinned this shark to the late Miocene. That matters, because it makes hubbelli the earliest clear member of the great white's own genus in the whole Pacific. The great white, in deep time terms, is a newcomer. It is millions of years younger than the giant it supposedly shrank from. And its ancestor was not a giant at all. It was a mako, the broad-toothed mako, to be exact, a fast, smooth-toothed shark called Cosmopolitodus hastalis. That shark sits in the lamnid family. So do today's makos. So does the great white. Ehret's fossil drops the great white's origin firmly inside that line. The serrations grew up there, among the makos, out of teeth that started almost smooth. They were never borrowed from the giant, because the giant was never in this family to lend them. The Megalodon sits on a completely different branch. Its family is the Odontidae. The lineage runs in a clear chain from Otodus obliquus through several steps, Auriculatus, Angustidens, Chubutensis, and ends at Otodus megalodon. That chain is why the corrected modern name is Otodus megalodon, not Agassiz's Carcharodon. Two families, two separate roads to the same kind of tooth. The two branches had split long before either the great white or the megalodon existed. The family portrait everyone carries is wrong then, in both directions. The great white is not the megalodon's child. The megalodon is not the great white's giant grandfather. They are distant cousins who happen to invent the same knife. And that leaves one thing unexplained. What happened on the day those cousins finally shared water? Here is the part that turns a family tree correction into something closer to a crime scene. By about 4 million years ago, the great white had finished spreading. Its teeth show up in cool, productive coastlines all over the world, and many of those coastlines were the exact shallow nurseries where young megalodons grew up before they reached their giant adult size. That overlap is the problem. An adult megalodon was untouchable. A juvenile was not. Young megalodons were great white-sized, hunting great white prey in great white water. The new shark was never fighting the giant directly. It was competing with the giant's children for the same seals, the same small whales, the same fish, during the most vulnerable years of the giant's whole life. The new shark did not have to beat the adults. It only had to thin out the nursery to make sure fewer of the young ones survived to become adults. There is chemical evidence they were fighting over the same table. In 2022, a team led by Jeremy McCormack, publishing in Nature Communications, measured zinc isotopes locked inside fossil shark teeth. Zinc records how high up the food chain an animal feeds. The great whites and the megalodons that shared the early Pliocene came back with overlapping signatures. In plain terms, the chemistry says they were eating at the same level. Two predators, one menu. A 2019 study made the rest of the scenario explicit. Robert Bosenecker and colleagues, working through the fossil record of the Eastern Pacific and that same Pisco Formation, laid out the overlap directly. A short window in which the spreading great white and the fading megalodon shared range and prey. They proposed the competition as a serious contributing factor in the giant's decline. Not the flashy old idea that a nearby supernova wiped it out. Something quieter and closer to home. Honesty matters here, because this is where the story is still argued. The great white was not the only pressure on Megalodon. The seas were cooling. Whale populations were shifting toward colder, deeper water the giant could not easily follow. Some researchers point to orcas, not great whites, as the real new competition. The Megalodon's fall almost certainly had more than one cause. Anyone who sells it as a murder with a single suspect is overselling it. The ocean does not always reward the biggest predator. It rewards the one that outlasts the rest. And what the fossils show is that the great white was in the room, in the nursery, on the same prey, at the same moment, when the giant began to disappear. It was one of the last things to change before the largest shark that ever lived ran out of ocean. Which brings us to the number almost every telling of this story still gets wrong, and the study that fixed it. Here is the number. For a long time, the giant's disappearance was dated to about 2.5 million years ago. That figure is still repeated on the biggest videos about this animal, some of them with tens of millions of views. It is out of date. That same 2019 team in Pier J went back through the youngest supposed Megalodon fossils and found a pattern. The late ones were either poorly dated or misidentified as Megalodon when they were not. Strip those out, and the real record ends earlier. The corrected extinction lands around 3.5 million years ago. That is not a footnote. Moving the date earlier by 1 million years tightens the whole window. It puts the giant's final decline right on top of the moment the great white had finished spreading into its coastlines. The two events were not separated by a comfortable 1 million years. They were neighbors in time. The last megalodons and the first worldwide great whites were sharing an ocean. And here is what the survivor walked into. When the giant went, it did not just leave a gap in the food chain. It left the whole role of coastal apex predator open. The seals, the sea lions, the mid-sized whales, the productive cold water shallows. The animal already living in that exact niche, already built for that exact prey, was the great white. It did not need to grow to 18 meters to win. It only needed to still be there when the 18-meter animal was not. The real shape of it, then, is almost the exact opposite of the myth. The great white never descended from the megalodon. It climbed up the Mako line. It built its own serrations, in its own family, over millions of years, and left one half-finished tooth in a Peruvian desert to prove it. And it was named, wrongly, after the very giant it would go on to outlive. When the two finally shared an ocean, the smaller shark did not inherit a crown from a dying king. There was no handoff. There was no bloodline. It walked into the king's nursery and ate the king's food, year after year, while the seas cooled and the prey thinned. The mislabeled child was, at best, one of the reasons the so-called father is now a fossil in a desert, and at worst, the quiet, gray-backed thing that helped close the book on the largest shark the planet ever built. Go back to that warm shallows, 4 million years ago. The giant's shadow is thinning. The gray shark is still cutting through the same nursery water. The same wide, saw-edged teeth in its jaw. Teeth it built itself. One of these two animals ends up in the Pisco Desert, a tooth in a museum drawer. The other is off Guadalupe tonight, still hunting. The giant got the myth. The smaller shark got the ocean. That desert in Peru, the one that gave up the great white's missing ancestor, is hiding something bigger. The same formation holds an entire dead ocean. Megalodon, its prey, its rivals. All of them fossilized in one place, on a coastline that is now one of the driest deserts on Earth. It is the only place on the planet where the graveyard of the deadliest ocean that ever existed sits in open desert, not a drop of water in sight. Whole whales, megalodon teeth, the rivals that shared the water. All of it locked in stone, under a sky that has not seen rain in living memory. This codex has one rule: it does not leave a grave unread. The question is, what kind of sea kills and keeps its own giants, all together, in a place the water later walked away from?